Good morning. Hey, Sarah.
Good morning. Hi.
How are you?
Doing well. How are you?
I'm well, thanks. I really appreciate you carving out some time this morning to help me with my project.
Absolutely. No
I,
problem.
I think just quick intro, and I'll give an intro on the blog itself, but just this is a podcast assignment for a educational technology course that I'm taking for my master's program.
Mhm.
And basically, we're tackling a digital technology education issue, and one that I'm kind of passionate about is digital inequities,
Mhm.
lack of access, all kinds of things from accessibility standpoint, racial socioeconomic differences. So I'm
Mhm.
interviewing a couple of folks in different subjects, different areas, different
Yeah.
some in organizations, some in schools, and I thought just due to your background, you would be a great person to kind of run some of these thoughts by.
Well, thank you.
Cool. Well,
Yeah.
let's just kick it off and maybe you can give me an intro, who you are,
Yeah.
your background in education, like what licenses you have, where you're currently teaching,
Mhm.
subjects, grades, that kind of thing.
Yeah. Yep. So my name is Sara Vizina, and I teach at Sheboygan High School in Northern Michigan. We are a very rural school district. I got my undergrad from Grand Valley State University in Spanish and psychology with an emphasis on education. I started teaching in 2009. And then I have to check the year here. In 2013, I received my master's from Spring Arbor University, master's in education. And then a couple years ago, I started a specialization program for administration. And I am almost done with that. I am on my last class and I take my test in December for administration.
So you kind of notice you've done this thing where you've asked people to help you with homework, or how is the
Oh, I still am asking people for help on a weekly basis.
Cool.
Yes.
Well, thanks for helping pay it forward. It's a big ask, but I do think kind of education is one of those fields where like the more connected you are and the more
Yeah,
you're chatting with other people in it, yeah,
absolutely.
it
And the
definitely
more
helps.
that you're solving problems.
Cool. Well,
Yeah.
I appreciate your perspective because I think you're of a similar age as me. And so when I think of like, oh, I don't have an education background. I didn't get my education undergrad or anything like
Mhm.
that. It was kind of later, but we still kind of have, I don't want to say a delay. We're kind of in that middle place where if I ask somebody who's maybe 50 or 60 about what kind of educational technology things they learned versus somebody who's kind of going through it right now, we kind of got the beginning of it, and you
Yeah.
probably saw some cool things in your master's, even though it was shortly after your undergrad, but maybe even more so now, maybe a little bit, hopefully a little bit more technology integrated into some of those programs.
I couldn't agree with you more. We're on that cusp. So even some teachers that are 10 years older than me, they are very resistant to it. And my age group, it's kind of like, okay, we're starting to embrace it. And then I think even some of the younger teachers are much better at it than I am.
Yeah, cool. Well, they definitely got all the tools, so I'm glad that
Yeah.
we're still acquiring them. But
Yeah. Still learning.
yeah. Well, let's dive into it. If I had like an hour and a half, I would ask you all these questions, but we'll get like right to the
Yeah.
crux of the whole thing. But I think I teed you up with the fact that we're talking about like digital inequities. So
Yes.
like when I say that to you, what immediately comes to mind, I guess, maybe from like it could be big picture or in your school or however specifically, like if I just said that phrase to you, what you think of.
I think of not all students being able to access the internet and use the internet in the same way or in a way that is meaningful to them.
Sure, sure. Yeah, and I think that's probably like the best, most all-encompassing. I think of places maybe that do have all the resources and everybody
Mhm.
has internet, but do they
Yeah.
have the wherewithal to use it? Do they have additional support in the classroom to utilize different apps on the internet?
Hmm.
Um, Creation of work,
Yeah.
creativity, yeah, anything. So it can all go down from there, but I think that's a nice summation of that.
Hmm.
Um, are you able to speak freely about some of those things that maybe you see in your classroom specifically
Yeah,
in the
absolutely.
school
Yeah.
district? Yes,
Yeah, absolutely.
examples of the inequities.
So interestingly enough, when COVID hit, we worked very, very hard in a I mean, we had 24-hour notice that we were going online. And so it was all hands on deck. We worked very hard to get every family a hotspot. who didn't have current internet hookup, and we worked very hard to distribute Chromebooks. So we actually had like big trucks of Chromebooks, and people would come and we would disperse these things because it needed to happen so quickly. Everybody was online. And actually, I think in some ways we have regressed from that, because then once we got back into school, now the kids in my school have Chromebooks in the classrooms. So any class, they can use the Chromebook and the internet, no problem. But then when they get home, some have internet, some don't. I spoke with our technology director who said that we have about 60% of our students that have internet access at home.
Wh- Wow.
And
What,
so,
so what do you think happened between, I mean, first of all, I know Northern Michigan. I'm picturing
yeah,
Sheboygan and
yeah,
yeah, pretty rural, but I think of like people outside of the city where you are just kind of like rolling into this 40-acre, 100-acre property and saying, here's some internet for your kid.
yes.
So that's kind of a cool like
So,
triage approach. But what
yeah,
happened between then and
we,
now, do you think?
so we took those hotspots back. And because kids were in school, right? We have internet here. And then what happened was we made a blanket statement like, if you don't have internet at home, if it is not accessible to you, whether you're out in the boonies and or it's not affordable, you can come to us and you can get a hotspot. Well, the problem is a lot of those families either, quite frankly, are too proud to go to the school and say, yes, we need help. Or, there's too much going on, they're too busy and they just don't. And so that accounts for those 40% that aren't online at home. And that does create an issue with students and finishing some of their online assignments because we know there's a lot of great online tools for education. Some of 60% of the kids are able to access that at home, and 40% are not.
If you had to give a rough estimate of like how much work you personally, like your class is doing, it's all online, it's all on Chromebooks.
So it's not all. I have a Google Classroom that I use, that I upload all of. So I teach Spanish to 8th through 12th graders. And I will put vocabulary lists, extra copy of assignments, and things like that. So I use my Google Classroom as like a resource, for kids to access. Like if they're absent, they get sick for 3 days, they don't fall behind, right? But again, you need that connectivity at home. I would say that probably about 30 to 40% of my curriculum, my assignments are online.
Do you catch yourself changing your approach to accommodate the students that don't have access?
Yeah,
Which is maybe
absolutely.
a disservice, like not reading into it, but kind of disservice to students that do have access and maybe potentially aren't getting like the full online or tech, not even just online internet access, but all those apps run by internet. So it's not just
Yeah.
accessing, it's the full exploration of anything that could potentially be on any
Well,
piece of technology.
and for like 8th grade Spanish, they're young and they're learning how to study. So we have some really great programs online that are excellent for vocabulary acquisition. My students who are connected at home have access to those materials, and it's easier and more effective for them to study. And the kids who don't have that connectivity at home have to find other ways to study. And I can teach them other ways to study, but sometimes it's not as fun.
Yeah, for sure. And I do think it's interesting that you say that too, because I think in my mind, I think of subjects specifically that have a lot of access to tech, or it's easy to build curriculum
Yes,
around tech, and that's
yes.
math, science, anything
Yep.
like that, like all the STEM
Mhm.
related things you think of. And so
Yeah,
Spanish, language arts, history sometimes are those ones where it is kind of hard to integrate technology into it, but it sounds like you do have some tools, vocabulary study apps, that kind of thing. So
yeah.
so by subject matter, you would not say that there's an inequity, or do you feel that way sometimes maybe when you're doing Spanish or psychology where you don't have as much access to technology related content because it's not math and science.
Yeah. I would say definitely math and science has more, content online. Absolutely. I think our math curriculum here at the high school is almost entirely online.
Oh, wow. That's
And
great.
I use, yeah, they have a program and it's all, it's all online. In my classroom, I use internet assignments for, if we're exploring different holidays, if we're
Oh,
exploring
cool.
different foods, we might do, a little web quest. And then again, those games that reinforce the vocabulary acquisition. So it's basically supplemental material, whereas in other disciplines, it's very heavy in that it's their daily material.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah.
Cool. And not to jump ahead, but you said something that kind
Mhm.
of triggered this thought that
Yeah.
I had where, there's an infinite amount of resources about how to kind of dismantle these inequities.
Yeah.
And they can be big, grandiose things. And I think you kind of touched on one with the giving every family a hotspot. Like
Mhm.
in one of the books that I was reading, it touches on the fact that like people work like organizations work with schools to get Wi-Fi on every school bus so
Yeah.
that kids kind of have they can bridge the
Yeah.
gap between home and school. I think that's a huge initiative.
Uh-huh.
So you kind of talk about that, but then the other cool one that you talk about is like a virtual field trip. So I do think like that was one that was in a book too, like offering a virtual field trip in your classroom. It sounds like you kind of do things like that
Yeah.
to kind of help. So it sounds like there are things that you're doing, maybe that you're aware of or not aware of that are kind of dismantling inequities, these digital inequities. Can you see that without me pointing that out? Is it like an intentional thing, or can you speak to that a little
I,
bit?
I'm not really sure if it's intentional. I guess maybe subconsciously it is. I just try to do, my web quest, for instance, we do a web quest about food around the world in the Spanish speaking countries. And so, they have a map with different pinpoints. They click on the pinpoint. It takes them to a page that has, typical food dishes for that country. They explore those. And generally, I try to end the lesson where they are so that they don't have to continue it at home because like I said 40% of my students don't have that ability and I also don't want their grade to suffer because of that. So I'll gauge the students, if we are mostly done, great. If we're not, then we'll pick up where we left off the next day.
Hmm.
I'm not going to assume that they have that access at home and
Hmm.
assign it as homework.
Yeah. It sounds like that's a good, I mean, it's a whole nother layer of awareness that you're making in these in lesson plans when you're planning out curriculum, but it sounds like you're aware of that and accommodating, which I think is a compliment to just you making sure that all of your students are included. That is access to digital resources in and of itself, which I think is
Right.
great.
Yeah. Thanks.
Cool. Um, yeah, no, I think we covered a lot about stuff that's going on in your classroom, stuff that's going on in your school district. I do want to touch on just like two things, and it's mostly just sharing resources. There are a ton, but it is always nice to like hear things that are working well. In any of your more recent continuing education classes towards more administrative focused things, is anything kind of bubble to the top of like of things that you're hearing about? Technology and education, any interesting like little tidbits you want to touch on, something, some assignment in a class or, new information about accommodating, because if you're viewing it from an administrator standpoint, how to integrate technology in curriculum, is that a focus? Anything that you've seen in any recent classes you've taken?
Yeah. So technology and education is always a hot button issue. Always looking at how we can revamp, the technology in our classroom, how we can, help students understand that technology. I recently got a BenQ board in my classroom,
Oh,
learning
I
how to
don't
use
know
that
that. Gotta write
interactively.
that down.
Yeah, BEN and then a capital Q.
Cool.
It is a really cool board, interactive, really great for the students. They can interact with it as well. Teaching them how. So we went through this whole initiative district wide as to how to use them and how to help the kids interact with them as a tool for learning. And it seems like, that is every couple of years, we are as a district focusing on a new technology
Hmm.
to move forward. Now, I don't think that we have the best technology, and I don't. So, for instance, we have one tech director for our entire district, and we have about 1,500 kids. So I can't say that technology is a focus of ours because it seems like if it were, we would probably have some more supports. But I think we do an okay job at educating ourselves into the new technologies and also being aware of those inequities that families unfortunately have at home that exist at home.
Hmm.
Um, the problem comes you can't drive a hotspot to every single home and say, here, take this. And sometimes the initiative has to come from the family.
Yeah. I mean, it's like, and that's an issue that happened even before technology. Technology's always been
Yeah,
a thing, but let's pretend before
always.
there were Chromebooks, it's like, this is
Oh,
your homework, your kid's homework assignment. You need to help
yes.
them. So it's like, yeah,
Yeah.
there's only so much you can do in all those regards. Yeah.
Yeah, there's only so much you can do.
Yeah.
Um, we have what's interesting is that AI has become a huge topic in education, AI and technology, specifically how it can help educators. And
Hmm.
so recently we had a group of teachers attend a conference in Detroit, I believe, to learn about AI and how it can help the school, the students, and teachers. And our group of teachers are gathering some information to make a presentation to us soon.
Oh, cool.
So that came to mind too recently.
Yeah, and it's interesting. Part of this course, you do hear it everywhere from
Yeah,
every kind of facet. And part of this
yeah,
course has been kind of joining different organizations, memberships in
yeah,
organizations, and like ISTE standards. If you are a member of their yeah, if you participate in their membership, they send you all cool webinars, and a lot of them
yeah,
are pretty tech focused and
yeah.
surrounding standards associated with integration of technology in curriculum
Mhm.
and really cool adaptations of AI for teachers, for students, all kinds of
Yeah,
stuff. But yeah, I
yeah,
mean, there's no denying it. I picture what it was like however many years ago when we first started talking about laptops. Every student's going to have a laptop. We probably thought that was insane. And here we are
yeah.
talking about all kinds of different
AI.
things. So yeah, it's
Well,
really
and that's
wild.
another thing too. We have a lot of students that are using AI to help them at home with their homework,
Yeah.
good, bad, or indifferent.
Can you tell as a
That's the thing.
teacher on
Oh,
the
yes.
receiving? Oh, you can.
Yes.
Okay, cool.
Yeah, because for a lot of the students, we learn their voice. We learn
Oh, fair.
how they write, how they express themselves. Clearly, I teach mostly eighth graders. I'm gonna know if they use AI. Our high school students, it is our teachers do a good job of learning, how they write. And so when they turn in a paper that is, not their voice,
Yeah.
it's pretty easy to tell. And I think there's some programs online too where you can plug in,
Yeah.
different things and it'll flag it. But AI can be really helpful to students.
Sure.
And so if they have that internet at home, that's going to help them as well.
For sure. Yeah.
Mhm.
Yeah. Too
Yeah.
crazy.
Mhm.
So just last question. I've had a couple of other assignments over the last handful of years, and I do think like as me personally, a person kind of getting into education, kind of tacking it on as a tangent to my job.
Yeah.
One question that I always find really beneficial is what everybody finds beneficial. So, um, yeah, anything else? Are there any blogs that you follow, any resources that you follow? And this can be ed tech space or not ed tech space. Any programs that you use that you love? Um, any anything you can think of that is worth sharing with somebody kind of diving into this?
Mm, specifically technology.
No, not even necessarily. I mean, that's always an easy thing to talk about because that's what we're talking about. But even if it is just a cool tip or trick, yeah.
You know, I believe it or not am fairly resistant to technology. I see how it is beneficial, but it at first feels very uncomfortable to me for something new because I don't have a lot of time.
Mhm.
And so when, like for instance, when they first gave me my Ben cue board, I looked at him and I'm like, take that out, roll that out of here. But then when I started using it, it was so easy and so helpful um, in the classroom. And so although I'm resistant, I warm up to it quite quickly. But I can't, I can't think anything off the top of my head.
Yeah, that's fair. That's totally fair. And just you inspired a story. So anecdotally, just a funny,
Yeah,
the beginning of this semester, one of the articles that we read was kind of talking about this thing where teachers learn to teach. They learn the subject matter and they learn to teach. The technology thing has always been kind of at the side where you learn it as like an accessory thing,
yeah,
you know?
yeah.
And so how do you teach, like if Spanish is the thing that you're great at,
Uh-huh,
then you learn to teach that.
uh-huh.
Then you learn to integrate technology. So one of the
Yeah,
first reading assignments was basically about these initiatives that the United States had to like help. And it sounds like the things that we're doing now, this put the Ben Q board in your classroom, sounds very similar to things they were doing in the 80s. And in this article, so you know my wife Sarah, her dad, Maury,
yeah,
was a
yeah.
math teacher
Teacher,
in
yeah.
Indian River Schools, which is
Yep.
just right by Sheboygan and
Uh-huh.
where you and your family live. So he retired 10 plus years ago, but he tells this story that when I was reading this article is exactly what happened. Basically, they just picked a handful of kind of what they thought were cooperative teachers and said, we're going to put a Apple Mac computer, like the giant ones that you think of that we saw when we were in
Yep.
school, because you're my age.
Yep.
They put one in the teacher's classroom and the same one in the teacher's home. And they said, if you can fully integrate these, like you'll know how to use the computer. And I read about it and I instantly sent it to him because he told me of that experience. He was
Yeah.
the teacher chosen in Indian River to have this Mac plop down.
Congratulations, you have
I
a
know.
Mac.
Yeah, right. And so like you're
It's
blind leading
huge.
the blind. Nobody knows how to teach you it, but I always think
Yeah.
stuff like that is so funny. But
Well, and I think that's part of it too. I think you hit on that perfectly. Like, as teachers, we learn how to teach and then we integrate this technology, which takes some effort, but then also you can't have that without proper training. And
yeah,
training also takes time.
time and money.
Time, time seems to be something that teachers are fairly short on.
Yeah.
So hence why there's so much resistance.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, we're doing it. I mean, everybody's doing it. I appreciate it sounds like without even kind of leading you through the stuff you're already doing, things that I do think are helpful in this space, which is reassuring, you know.
Yeah.
Despite maybe personal resistance to some forms of technology, it sounds like you're still using it in a way that
Mhm.
benefits your
Yep.
students in an accommodating way, which I think is great.
Hmm.
Um, I really appreciate your time on this. Is there
Yeah,
anything else we didn't cover? I mean,
absolutely.
given another hour, we could have dove
Yeah,
into all of it, but I think we covered a lot of ground, and I appreciate that.
we did. Absolutely.
Awesome. Well,
Thank you for
thanks.
having me.
Yeah, thanks so much. I'm gonna end the recording now, but
Okay.
again, thank you so much.
Yes, thank you.
All right.